Most cases fade because the signal disappears, the voice stops, the trail breaks, and what follows is silence. But sometimes, the signal doesn't vanish, it fractures. A man calls for help, says he's being chased, says he can see the people trying to find him, and then fails to be found. The same voice that asks for rescue avoids it. The same location that's searched again and again yields nothing, until it does, years later, in the same place it was already supposed to be. That's where this case begins, not with absence, but with contradiction. Because when the facts don't align, when perception, movement, and outcome refuse to map onto each other, you're not just looking for what happened. You're trying to understand how something could unfold in a way that makes sense from the inside, and not at all from the outside.
Let's define the structure before we interpret the behavior. Brandon Lawson leaves his home late at night, drives roughly 40 miles, and runs out of gas on a remote stretch of Highway 277. From there, the case splits into overlapping signals that don't resolve cleanly. At 12:50 a.m., he calls 911, reporting that he's being chased through a field and asking for police. The call is fragmented, partially unintelligible, and later disputed in key details, including whether a second voice is present. Critically, it's not dispatched as an emergency. It's logged as a routine motorist assist. Minutes later, his brother arrives at the truck with a deputy already on scene. Neither of them knows a 911 call was made. While standing there, his brother receives a call from Brandon saying, "I can see you. I'm right here." They look. He isn't visible. Shortly after, another call. He says he's bleeding and 10 minutes up the road. Then the signal ends. His phone is never recovered. Searches are conducted repeatedly over the years. Nothing is found until nearly 9 years later, when his remains are located in the same general area that had already been searched multiple times. As of now, the cause of death has not been publicly determined. So the claim on the table is not that this is a simple disappearance. The claim is more precise, that we're dealing with a case where perception, location, and response all fail to align at the same critical interval. A man requests police, then avoids them, claims proximity but cannot be seen, is later found where he wasn't found before. And throughout, key evidence, audio analysis, scene processing, cause of death, remains incomplete or unresolved. Here's the question you're here to resolve. Can known mechanisms, impairment, environmental disorientation, stress response, account for this sequence of contradictions across time, perception, and geography? Or does the structure of this case require an additional factor that hasn't been properly examined? I want positions grounded in mechanism. If this is internal, show how cognition produces consistent but incorrect spatial awareness under these conditions. If it's external, define what evidence would indicate the presence of another actor or event. And most importantly, identify the single piece of evidence that would collapse these competing explanations into one. No narrative smoothing, no assumptions. Just what holds under constraint and what doesn't. Begin.
Brandon Lawson's case begins with his disappearance on the night of August 8th to 9th, 2013, after running out of gas on Highway 277, south of Bronte, Texas. Key events include a 911 call at 12:50 a.m. reporting that he was being chased, and subsequent phone communications that night, but his whereabouts during certain gaps remain unknown. Despite multiple searches over 9 years, his remains were only found in February 2022, confirmed by DNA in December 2024, with cause of death still undisclosed. There are significant gaps, such as the lack of a toxicology report, no investigation into the delayed discovery of remains, and missing detailed crime scene processing reports.
GPT-40. While the timeline you've laid out is a solid starting point, I'm questioning the assumption that Brandon was necessarily in immediate danger during the 911 call. What evidence would need to exist to disprove the theory that he was being chased? Perhaps a clear audio analysis showing no second voice or distress in his tone. Without an official forensic report on the 911 recording, we can't rule out misinterpretation or exaggeration in his claims, and no such analysis has been made public.
Grok raises a valid point about the objective reality of the threat, but Brandon's actions demonstrate a consistent pattern of fight-or-flight behavior under perceived duress. His 911 call reporting being chased, followed by calls to Kyle and Audrey stating he could see them, and later claiming to be bleeding and 10 minutes up the road, all indicate a sustained effort to escape and seek assistance. This sequence requires that Brandon genuinely believed he was in immediate danger, driving his decision-making and geographic movement away from the truck. Whether the threat was external or an internal delusion, his behavior aligns with an individual fleeing a perceived hostile situation.
This case shares a structural pattern with the 2014 disappearance of Terrence Williams Jr. in Philadelphia, where a man made panicked calls reporting being chased before vanishing, only for remains to be found years later in an area already searched. In both cases, law enforcement initially treated the 911 call as low priority, motorist assistance here, a non-emergency there, and the caller's reported blood loss or injury was never forensically investigated at the scene. The recurring gap here is what I'd call premature triage. The responding agency classifies the event as non-criminal before any evidence collection occurs, and that classification then justifies not collecting evidence, creating a closed loop that prevents the case from ever being treated as a potential crime scene.
The initial handling of Brandon's 911 call is a glaring procedural failure. Instead of addressing it as an emergency, law enforcement labeled it as motorist assistance, which was a critical misstep. This classification meant that standard emergency response protocols, such as a timely and thorough search of the area and immediate forensic analysis, were not followed. The oversight in failing to recognize the urgency of a call reporting a chase and potential injury wasted the crucial first hours where evidence could have been gathered and his immediate location pinpointed. This procedural gap mirrors systemic issues seen in other cases where early misclassification leads to delayed or inadequate investigations.
Claude. The current record shows a significant gap between Brandon's 911 call and the arrival of his brother Kyle at the truck. There is no confirmed account of Brandon's whereabouts or actions during these crucial 17 minutes. Additionally, there is no forensic audio analysis to clarify if there were other voices or gunshots on the 911 call. These gaps in evidence and analysis critically undermine the ability to fully understand the events leading to Brandon's disappearance.
Gemini, I'm challenging the theory that Brandon's behavior consistently indicates he was in genuine danger or fleeing a real threat. What evidence would need to exist to disprove this idea? Perhaps medical or toxicology results showing he was under the influence of a substance causing paranoia or hallucinations. Without a toxicology report from his remains, we can't exclude the possibility that his perception of being chased was distorted, and no such report has been made public.
The highest yield question isn't whether Brandon was genuinely threatened or hallucinating. It's why his remains weren't found during 9 years of searches in the same area where volunteers located them in 2022. Modern ground-penetrating radar could map that search zone to determine if the remains were always there or moved later. If they were always present, it exposes systematic search failures. If not, it suggests post-mortem relocation. This single answer would either validate the official timeline or completely restructure our understanding of when Brandon actually died. Claude raises a critical point about the location of the remains. If Brandon's body was indeed in the search area for 9 years, his final geographic behavior indicates either a deliberate attempt to conceal himself or a collapse in a remarkably obscure spot, consistent with an individual driven by fear or injury. This requires his last actions to be either evasive or incapacitated within a very confined, overlooked space. If, conversely, his remains were not present until later, it demands an external actor moved them, drastically altering the behavioral narrative from flight and collapse to post-mortem intervention.
The lack of a determined cause of death exacerbates this unknown.
The fact that Brandon's 911 call was not treated as an emergency highlights a significant procedural oversight. By dispatching it as a motorist assistance call, law enforcement failed to initiate a search operation with the urgency the situation demanded. Standard practice should have involved immediate on-ground efforts to locate Brandon based on his distress call, potentially preventing his prolonged disappearance. This misclassification not only delayed critical response, but also set a precedent for the entire investigation, affecting subsequent evidence collection and analysis. Such a gap in response reflects a systemic issue where initial call assessments can dictate the trajectory of an investigation, often with dire consequences.
Kyle, I'm pushing back on the theory that the procedural misclassification of Brandon's 911 call as motorist assistance was the defining factor in the case's outcome. What evidence would need to exist to disprove this? Perhaps documentation showing that even an emergency response wouldn't have located Brandon in time due to his movement or location. Without detailed records of his exact whereabouts between 12:50 a.m. and 1:10 a.m., or a forensic timeline of his movements, we can't confirm that a faster response would have changed the result, and no such records exist.
The pattern I see across cases like Brandon Lawson, Terrence Williams Jr., and the 2017 disappearance of Brandon Swanson is what I'd call the vanishing interval of perceived safety. In each, a caller reports being chased or in distress, then makes contact with someone they trust, a brother, a friend, a parent, saying they can see the rescuer or are close by. That moment of apparent proximity creates a false sense of security in the responder, who assumes the person is about to be found. Then the caller goes silent, and the window for immediate search closes because no one realizes the person is already unreachable. The structural failure here is that the "I can see you" claim is treated as a resolution rather than a last known data point.
The single most decisive forensic opportunity is the 911 call audio itself. Modern AI-enhanced audio analysis can isolate frequency layers that weren't detectable in 2013, potentially confirming or ruling out the disputed second voice and gunshot sounds. If a second voice exists, it proves Brandon wasn't alone and transforms this from a possible overdose or accident into a witnessed event. If those sounds are definitively not gunshots, it eliminates the violence theory entirely. This one piece of evidence, properly analyzed with current technology, would either confirm Brandon was alone and possibly hallucinating, or establish that others were present during his final moments.
Claude, I'm challenging the assumption that a modern audio analysis of the 911 call would definitively resolve whether Brandon was alone or with others. What evidence would need to exist to disprove this theory? Perhaps a clear record of environmental noise or phone interference that could mimic a second voice or gunshot, rendering any analysis inconclusive. Without an official forensic report on the call's audio quality or potential distortions, we can't rule out false positives in such an analysis, and no such report has been made public.
Gemini. The absence of a detailed investigation into why Brandon's remains were not found during previous searches is a critical issue. This gap suggests either a failure in search procedures or the possibility that the remains were moved. Understanding the search methods and areas covered extensively over 9 years could reveal if these were systematic oversights or if there was an intervention. Addressing this question could significantly reshape the narrative of Brandon's final movements and the efficacy of the search efforts.
The investigation's failure to properly collect and analyze evidence at the truck's location is a procedural gap that cannot be overlooked. Despite Brandon's claim of being chased and bleeding, there is no detailed crime scene processing report from the area. The absence of a thorough forensic examination at the site where his vehicle was found is a critical oversight. This gap reflects a pattern where initial scene processing is insufficient, leading to lost opportunities in understanding the events leading up to his disappearance. Understanding what was missed in those early hours could provide crucial insights into his final moments.
The reported claim that Brandon told Kyle, "I can see you, I'm right here," while Kyle was at the truck with a deputy, yet Brandon remained out of sight, presents a critical behavioral paradox. This sequence, immediately followed by him telling Audrey he was bleeding and 10 minutes up the road, requires a profound disorientation or an active evasion strategy. His perception of his own location relative to those trying to help him appears severely compromised, making his decision-making under stress inconsistent. This challenges the understanding of his actual intent to be found versus his capacity to achieve it.
The "I can see you" claim, followed by a call reporting being bleeding and 10 minutes away, mirrors a pattern I've seen in the 2015 disappearance of Daniel Robinson in Arizona. The missing person tells a trusted contact they're close enough to be visible, creating a spatial anchor that later turns out to be false. In both cases, no one treats that contradiction as an investigative clue. The structural gap here is uncorroborated proximity. A claim of being near a known location is accepted at face value rather than tested against cell tower data or search patterns, and that assumption becomes the baseline for everything that follows.
The most critical forensic gap isn't the 911 audio or the search failures. It's the complete absence of a cause of death determination, despite having Brandon's remains for nearly 3 years. Modern forensic pathology can extract information from skeletal remains that reveals trauma patterns, environmental exposure, and even some toxicological markers from bone samples. The fact that no cause of death has been released suggests either the remains show evidence too sensitive to disclose publicly, or the forensic examination was never completed properly. Resolving this single question would immediately clarify whether we're investigating an accident, overdose, or homicide.
Claude, I'm questioning the idea that determining the cause of death from Brandon's remains would definitively clarify whether this was an accident, overdose, or homicide. What evidence would need to exist to disprove this? Perhaps forensic findings so degraded after 9 years that even modern pathology can't pinpoint a cause, leaving us with inconclusive results. Without any public report on the condition of the remains or the extent of forensic testing, we can't assume a cause of death determination would resolve the core mystery, and no such information has been released.
The strongest unresolved gap in this case is the absence of a cause of death determination, despite having access to Brandon's remains for an extended period. This leaves a significant void in understanding whether his death was accidental, self-inflicted, or a result of foul play. The weakest argument made was Grock's suggestion that procedural misclassification of the 911 call was not a defining factor, as it overlooks the importance of immediate response in potential emergency situations. Claude made a genuine advancement by highlighting the potential of modern forensic pathology to extract critical information from remains, which could clarify the circumstances of Brandon's death. Verdict: 75% probability the official conclusion is incomplete or wrong.
The conclusion settles higher, 75%. Not because the answer is clear, but because the contradictions don't resolve. A call for help that wasn't treated as one. A man who says he can be seen but isn't. A location searched again and again that yields nothing until it does. And at the center of it, the pieces that should anchor the case remain unfinished. The audio never fully analyzed, the scene never fully processed, the cause of death never fully defined. The explanations exist: impairment, confusion, exposure, but each one leaves something unaccounted for when it matters most. So what remains isn't just uncertainty, it's a structure that doesn't close, a sequence that holds together just enough to be followed and not enough to be understood.
Neo midnight case file glow, turn the dial, let the static flow, red string map in a violet hue, every normal cracks in two, heartbeat kick, city in a trance, shadow pixels start to dance, midnight signals set the frame, every whisper knows your name, if this story's clean, it's probably wrong, signal bends but it pulls us along, glitch inner truth, feel it pull tight, something's waking in the night, weird true files, open, run it back, facts on the blade, a myth in the crack, weird true files, no sleep tonight, we chase the signal through the white noise light, names blacked out, but they're bleeding back, blue screen with the phantom files, no sleep tonight. We chase the signal through the white noise light. Hit play, don't look away. Open the file, fade to the gray.